afternoon for the two talks. So without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Chris Hailey and, of course, Peter Sellars.
Peter, I tell you, this is a wonderful opportunity for me because I get the program months in advance. It's always a little bit changing, and then I try to figure out what's in your mind. And I have to say, this is a so beautifully structured festival this year, and I'd like to kind of have you tell us about this wonderful bridges and links between concerts and themes.
Wow. Yes. Short answer, we can do that.
Yes.
Now, first, before we do that, are you going to use any notes on that music stand?
Not now.
There it is. Go on. Perfect.
Later.
Look at that. And do you need this architecture?
I don't need this architecture.
Okay, I think we can get rid of that.
All right.
And then we can be so unencumbered, it'll be incredible.
That's at union scale, too.
So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Ojai. Thrilling you all came. This festival is, of course, something that's been going for 70 years, which amazes and thrills me because, you know, we're always told that Americans have no sense of adventure and are stuck in the mud and blah, blah, blah. And you must say, excuse me. You say there are absolutely places where people come to see new and cool things. That is the whole point. That's been the point of being American from day one. That is actually what America stands for, is the front edge, is thinking of what can we do better, how can we go to something else, what are the next possibilities. That's what this country stands for, and not this backward-looking ridiculousness. So, so for me, Ojai is just completely comfortable. And, you know, life as it should be, and life as you always want it to be. And you want to be in the presence of the new, the same way, you know, it's a thrill when someone in your family gives birth. I mean, it's so exciting. It's just thrilling to be present at the moment when a new being comes into the world. And this weekend, that's going to happen several very, very powerful times. And I'm really pleased to say, having now been to the rehearsals, there are a couple of pieces appearing in the world for the first time this weekend that are going to be with us for decades and now belong to humanity. They were needed and here they are. So what's thrilling is you guys are all present at the christening, and it is a very powerful moment when something new enters the world. This festival, for me, is just the oxygenation that you just hope for the whole country. It's what you want to remind people of the connection to the land. You want to remind people of the just depth of beauty of this landscape, but also here in California, how fragile it is. And therefore, please take care of it. Please pay attention. Please recognize that everything is in a delicate series of interrelated equilibrium, ecosystem. One thing needs another, and everything's just at that edge of survival. And we know that, you know, from our cactus, we know that sometimes when you're at your worst, you turn that beautiful color of red. Sometimes the landscape gives its most beautiful features when it's under stress. But also, of course, also human beings. You find out what people are made of when life gets more difficult. And I think that's really why art was invented, as a way to give us practice, to reach a point of difficulty, and saying, okay, when things get that difficult, what are the resources you can draw on in yourself? and around you that are going to take us all through this. And that's why Beethoven wrote symphonies, not about nice things, but about, the city he was living in being under bombardment. And it's no accident that there's all that timpani stuff in those symphonies, because it is the sound of the bombs falling. And that music is rallying a community during a very painful time and saying, okay, where do we find the emotional resources and the spiritual resources to move forward together? So for me, this festival comes at a super great moment, when the hysteria level in this country is so out of control. And you want to say, what if you people just calm down for a moment? And what if we just tried paying attention to something for longer than 10 seconds? And what if it was something that not only requires your attention, but demands it? And then, of course, like anything in life that really demands your attention is rewarded. And so for me, this festival is a great weekend of no entertainment. Nothing available at any multiplex will be on display. And, and the steroids have been removed from the content in advance. And so it's really quite unadulterated. It's the other thing that's very exciting. It's a group of artists some of whom I've known for many, many years and have shaped me and my work, and others who I'm meeting for the first time this week. And again, if anybody ever tells you, or like Congress, trying to act like there is no future, we can actually demonstrate there is a future here this weekend, because the new generations of people that are doing things are stunning. And there is absolutely no dropping off of brilliance, of intensity, and of commitment. And the new generation is brilliantly equipped.
Peter, I think that's one of the things that strikes me in going to the rehearsals. You talk about works which will be with us for decades, and thankfully we have young artists who are now going to be with us for decades, because this is a phenomenal crop of what is out there, what's happening. And I have to say, you're giving them the challenges, and every single piece, as diverse as they are, they rise to that challenge and they go beyond.
I think that's, again, classical music, it's a crazy term, but one of the things I love about it is it's always, for the performers, hard. It just always, you have to test the best of yourself against something. It's never music that just says, oh, whatever you feel like. It says, no, not whatever you feel like. We're going to make very, very specific demands. And rising to those demands requires practice, skill, commitment, virtuosity, and surpassing yourself. And when human beings, focus, of course, that's one of the greatest moments. As you probably know, spiritual power is totally about concentration and focus. So just even the simplest meditation practice is just about stopping and focusing. And we are so distracted most of the time, and of course we're surrounded by a culture of permanent distraction where, the internet is even the best because they truly want you not to be able to complete a single thought before you've already thought of something else that you can now be onto. And so what it means not to be able to follow even one of your thoughts before 50 other thoughts show up. Music is an attempt to say, okay, now here's an idea, let's follow it. Let's stay with it. And give yourself the pleasure of staying with it. Just find what it is to live with something for a while. and let your mind and let your emotional life focus rather than run around in a distracted way. And of course, spiritual power comes from focus, which is why you have the great paintings of Vermeer, right? Where a woman is just making lace. But that quality of focus commands incredible spiritual power. Or the moment where she's just read a letter, and for that moment she's quiet and thinking. And in that quiet moment, her life changes, your life changes. It's like the search for that quiet moment of focus in your life. So this festival is not all quiet, but it is highly focused. And one of the things that we've done this year is to not have so many concerts, because I just want people to have time to be in the landscape and to be with each other. And most concerts last an hour. There are no intermissions for any concert. Every concert is just an experience to be there and then to wander off and to be with friends. And then come back and we'll do another concentrated hour later. And that idea of just having an hour that really lets everything be fresh, lets everything be at maximum focus and immediacy, and then the performers should do something else and you should do something else. And really let things open up.
Peter, let's talk about some of the specific works and some of these links that you've created, beginning with the opening and the closing of the festival. Two remarkable individuals who embody this idea of focus and intensity. You want to say a little something about the Vivier and in the Saariaho fashion?
Well, you know, what I thought of doing, of course, is whenever you get to pick a program, it's so exciting because you can put first what everyone else would put last. You know, Simone Weil is an extremely difficult figure, and many people really hate her and dislike her, and you announce Simone Weil and people turn and run the other way, and they say, this is disgusting, we will have nothing to do with this. She's a very difficult figure. She's a philosopher who lived at the beginning of the 20th century, and she was born into a secular Jewish family in Paris that was quite brilliant. Her brother was a great mathematician, André Weil, who ended up working with Oppenheimer at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, and was simply one of the great mathematicians of the 20th century. She was the little sister, and she and Simone de Beauvoir were the first two women to graduate with an advanced degree from the Sorbonne in the same year. Simone de Beauvoir became Simone de Beauvoir. Simone Weil decided that the crisis of the 20th century was labor and workers, and the life of workers, and the quality of life of workers. And so she went from her advanced degree in the Sorbonne to working on the assembly line in a Renault car factory plant with her PhD, and trying to tell the workers about Plato on lunch hour. It was a disaster. She had to be hospitalized repeatedly. She was not up to the physical demands of the work, but she wanted to be in solidarity with people who she felt were suffering. And she wrote about factory work as time on the cross, that you're giving your life blood for people you will never meet. And what it is, that hour after hour of working on those shifts, and the mechanization of human beings, the reducing all of us to employees and machines, she was very opposed to. She then tried to work with workers' parties, with the Communist Party. She, of course, irritated everyone. And she even joined some of the Americans who were helping out in the resistance to the Spanish Civil War. And she drove an ambulance, and of course then herself had to be hospitalized and driven out in an ambulance. She was very fragile, but spiritually very strong. Her work was really not known till after her death, when it was collected in particularly a great book I recommend to you called Gravity and Grace. The short answer is when you read her writing, it opens up something in you. She's not one of those people who you take her wisdom. She actually prompts you to your wisdom. And she will write one sentence where suddenly the whole world opens, and you're so moved. And then the very next sentence is one of the most offensive things you've read in your entire life. And you can't believe that anyone would think that sentence and then write it down. And there it is. And each thing is next to the other, so that her writing is a permanent challenge. It's not someone who can just say, oh, I agree with all that. You have to take every sentence one step at a time, and you have to say, where am I in relation to this? And she's like that very difficult friend who you can't stand, but of course who you need in your life. And if I could say, in the Hebrew tradition, I think of her as the modern equivalent of Jeremiah. You're like, if someone who you don't want around most days, but actually someone has to say those things, because most of them are true. And none of your other friends will speak to you that way, ever. So for me, I look at her as one of the most difficult of the biblical prophets. And her writing, she took on in the 20th century, in the 30s in particular, while the male philosophers, with the rise of fascism, Mussolini in Italy, Stalin, of course, in Russia, and Hitler, many of the male European philosophers decided that philosophy was about fine points of language. Simone Weil said, no, it's about the roots of evil. And she would not back away from facing what was happening to the world, as the world was entering a phase of such self-destruction and outrageous levels of tyranny, an unimagined scale of evil. And as a woman, she took on all of it. You don't have Bertrand Russell writing about the philosophy of evil, marvelous as he is. Strangely, it took a woman, and a woman who put her body always where her belief system was. One more example, when the Nazis moved into Paris, her family was one of the first targeted as a prominent Jewish family, and they fled south. They ended up getting to Morocco, and because they had some connections, as you know, America was not letting Jews in 1940, 41, 42. You've probably seen the memo that the State Department put out to every U.S. embassy saying, do not let these people in. Stall, make up stories, say you need another photograph. It doesn't matter what you say, just stall these people. And of course, we knew the death camps were going full blast. It's one of the most painful and shameful moments in U.S. immigration history, and of course, we have others now. But the documents now exist. We can see that Jews were kept out of this country in those years. Just to say, Simone and her family from Morocco got amazingly visas to come to New York in 1942. And they arrived on a ship, and her family was very grateful. Simone lasted about 3 weeks. She said, "How can I sit here in New York in a cafe while the Nazis are overrunning my country?" And she has to be one of the only people who got back on a boat and returned to Nazi-occupied France. She wanted to join the resistance. Of course, she was so clumsy, they would not let her near anything. So she was sent to London to be with the Free French government in exile under de Gaulle and to write the paper for how to rebuild Europe after the war. And the paper is one of the great, great documents. It's called The Need for Roots. And she says, in order to rebuild Europe, two things will have to be eliminated. One is communism, and the other is capitalism. In 1943, when the war was in a particularly intense place, and it was not clear the Germans would lose. In fact, it was the opposite. Simone, living in London, surrounded by friends, decided to stop eating because she decided she wouldn't have one more bite of food than her fellow countrymen in the death camps. And that would be her act of witness and her act of solidarity. Her doctors were furious. Her friends were absolutely in despair. And she starved herself to death in 1943, surrounded by friends and plenty of food. T.S. Eliot declared that she was the first saint of the 20th century. And her writings began to circulate after her death because, as with so many figures, it was their death that called attention to their life. And I was very, very influenced by her work when I was in university because of Robert Coles, the great, great psychologist, who taught classes on Simone Weil, and it made a very deep impression. And as I got to know Kaija Saariaho, the Finnish composer, rather well, about 5 years after we'd known each other, we both realized that we both loved Simone Weil. And Kaija left her family very young, as a teenager, to go to Europe and find herself far from Finland. And in her backpack was Gravity and Grace by Simone Weil. So I think this book has been, for both of us, a really important moment of self-discovery and also feeling some kind of restoration of equilibrium in the world, and also in a period where everyone tells you you have to compromise everything. It's so moving that this woman who was so impossible lived with a kind of intense purity that is like a legend. And so Kaija has written something called The Passion of Simone, which she wrote for the New Crowned Hope Festival, which I curated in Vienna 10 years ago for the 250th birthday of Mozart. And I asked the artists to respond to the last year of Mozart's life: magic flute, magic and transformation, the trials by fire and water of the young generation. Clemenza di Tito, response to terrorism, truth and reconciliation, forgiveness, and ceremonies for the dead, the Mozart Requiem. So for Kaija, it was this piece about Simone that would be her passion, in the same way the Bach Passions describe a kind of martyrdom. And the steps of a community following somebody on a difficult path that was attempting to hold a spiritual balance of power in a very painful age. It's maybe Kaija's, it's a very important work for Kaija. I can only say that. We'll see what she says about it, but I can only say that she dedicated it to her children, and it's clearly something that is her testament. And so what I love is opening the festival with something that is so unrelentingly serious is just not about wasting time. And is about going to the most intense possible places we can go as human beings. And asking ourselves the deepest questions we can ask. And then coming back with the best answers we can find within ourselves and our friends. I will just say one thing about this version of it, because we made it for Dawn Upshaw 10 years ago. And tonight you will hear Julia Bullock sing it. I met Julia as one of Dawn's students in Dawn's class at Bard. And those of you who were here for Dawn's festival a few years back in Ojai will remember she had one night she brought her students on stage. Julia was one of those students. Julia then went on to Juilliard, and I've now made a really large project with her before she even graduated from Juilliard, the Purcell Indian Queen. And she has a very rare quality that I won't say reminds you of Lorraine Hunt, because no one reminds you of Lorraine Hunt. Lorraine is Lorraine, and Julia Bullock is Julia Bullock. But you know you're in the presence of one of the great performers. And we sent the score to Julia, and I said, I'll let her live with the score for a week, because it's such complicated material, and then I'll call her up at the end of the week and explain it to her. I called her at the end of the week, and she said, this is my piece. I didn't have to explain anything. But what's very moving about having this piece performed by a young African American is in Julia's performance, it feels like a person who's committed to the Black Lives Matter movement, picking up a book by a radical from an earlier generation, from another century, and saying, what can we learn positively and negatively as we move on now, and we have to commit to what we're committed to in this lifetime, in this round. So I should mention one more thing, and then that's enough, but the text is by a really marvelous writer, and I would recommend to everyone in this room, Amin Maalouf. Amin is one of the great Arab writers. He's of Lebanese origin. He's been living in France for 30 years, since the Lebanese Civil War. He started as the editor of Jeune Afrique, which is the periodical that you read to find out what really is going on in Africa. And after a while, when the US Embassy was overtaken by radical kids in Tehran, and the West couldn't understand, Amin realized it was not enough to be a news reporter, that the history that we're living in, most people don't begin to understand and can't begin to imagine what from the other side of the world things look like. So his first book was called The Crusades Through Arab Eyes, and was an invitation to the West to see the world completely from the opposite direction and see another set of truths. And then he said, it's still not enough. I have to write novels that give you the depth of where people are coming from. Because everything that ends up for us as some screaming headline actually has centuries behind it. Amin's books have that depth and weight to them. We asked Amin if he would like to work on Simone Weil. He said, "Who's that?" And so while Kaija and I knew Simone Weil most of our lives, Amin was just discovering her. So the collaboration is very interesting because the piece has those dimensions to it. And Amin, as always, he's a very modest man. His libretto is just asking her a series of questions, like things you might want to ask this woman in a beautiful way, and not criticizing her, just not praising her, just saying, what are you thinking when you're doing this? And so I think the result is something, in a beautiful balance. And so it's a piece I treasure, and I'm very thrilled to open the festival with it tonight.
Peter, I'd like to sort of close that bracket by saying a little bit something about the last piece on the festival, and tying that in with something that I find in many of the programs, and that is Vivier was really approaching a new way to compose, a new definition of the composer in the way that we see replicated in the works of Oliveros. We see it also in the collaborative nature of so much of the music emerging from performing groups like Roomful of Teeth or Ice. And clearly that's a thread that runs through the festival as well. So maybe you could say something about that.
Yes, hey everyone. Amazingly, this festival is not about me. It's everyone else. Roomful of Teeth is an amazing vocal group, and they're a small they do small choral pieces, and with just beautiful close harmony and incredibly delicate vocal balances. And so they are performing for most of the festival in almost every concert, and it's going to be astonishing to be with them. And then, from last year, ICE, which is just the International Contemporary Ensemble, which are just the most spectacular set of musicians who do not know what no means. They are indefatigable and relentless in just going right to the heart of every piece, whatever it takes. So we have a group of performers. What's thrilling around them is the composers of several generations that move through these groups. So, for example, a patron saint is Pauline Oliveros. Now, most people here know Pauline's music for many, many years, but I would just say, if there was ever an avatar of music as pure joy, music as healing, as regeneration, of refocusing, of renewing, and refreshing every part of your being, that is Pauline Oliveros. This is just music that is a rush of aliveness, immediacy, and full presence. Mm-hmm. Pauline has been working with the ICE performers all weekend, and so they've come equipped with her instructions. So every morning starts with a meditation at 9 in the morning of Pauline's music that will clarify every other aspect of your day. So don't miss those 9 a.m. sessions. You will be rewarded by the 18 hours that follow. On the other end are composers like Carla Kielstadt. Carla is somebody who, at Oberlin decided, her story of how she started composing I kind of love, is she was a violinist, like in the Virtuoso, sweepstakes, and she heard a performance by Gidon Kramer of the Beethoven Violin Concerto with a cadenza composed by Alfred Schnittke, the great composer. And she couldn't find any sheet music to it, so she finally wrote a letter to Mr. Schnittke, who finally wrote back in a fine hand saying, "Only Mr. Kramer can perform my cadenza." I'm sure there was a financial deal, but whatever. Anyway, loyalty is touching in whatever form. And so Carla, guess what? On that day, she got that letter, because the concerto competition was the following week, had to become a composer. And she wrote her own cadenza. So we have Alfred Schnittke to thank. Anyway, Carla writes music with herself, playing the violin and with a microphone right there, and with her friends. And the music evolves in the group. And what's so beautiful is it's not a composer, that Stravinsky image of the genius sitting alone at a table, isolated from the universe, but actually being with friends and cooking up something together. And the marvelous thing that we're showing in this festival is actually based on dreams of members, musicians in ICE, that Carla then responded to. And so as people are telling their dreams, Carla has woven music all around it and through it. And it's just one of the most inspiring pieces, completely thrilling. Another composer of this generation is, of course, Carolyn Shaw, who people know because she won the Pulitzer Prize 2 years back for her Partita, which we perform tomorrow afternoon. And again, she's one of the singers in Roomful of Teeth, and it's music they've made together with the sound of their voices, their bodies. And it's not music primarily made on music paper, it's music made in the room when you're sculpting in sound. And you're really working with the living presence of sound as the chemical in the alchemy. And so the thrill of the way the sound itself works is amazing with these people, but also the way the performers share the pleasure of creation. So that it's not a kind of a class system of first-class creator, second-class creator, third-class creator. Everybody in the room is invited to be creative, including the audience. It's this sense that creativity is our human birthright, and there's no human being who doesn't own creativity. Possess it deeply, and it's right now at your fingertips, ready for use.
There are a couple of other composers here you're going to be introducing to this audience, and Lila Adu is someone, performer, composer.
Okay, late tomorrow night, tomorrow evening we have Dina El-Wadidi coming from Cairo, and I just have to say, I want everybody, since we waved to Ara Guzlimian, we also have to just wave and say thank you to Dianne Feinstein, because getting 13 people with long Arab names into the United States at this moment to come to an old radical hub like Ojai, watch out, it's a recipe that alarmed a lot of officials along the way. And we have to be grateful for Dianne Feinstein's office is the only way these musicians got into the country yesterday. When you hear them tomorrow night, you will know what you were being protected from. In any case, after Dina's set, and Dina does come to us all the way from Cairo and does bring the incredible sense of tumult, but also joy from what is going on in these parts of the world right now, where the news is all bad, but not really, because no news is all bad. And I think that's, again, one of the reasons art is here, is to remind you to look more deeply and to recognize inside that painful moment is the seed of a new rebirth. Dino, when you hear her tomorrow night, you will get the rebirth that this woman and her band represent, but also as they sing, you will hear the voice of a generation from the Arab world of idealistic, very courageous young people who do not care for the world of authoritarianism that surrounds them and have other ideas. and that is our eventual hope for democracy, is that we will get to hear other ideas from these parts of the world. After Dina, you will hear late night Laila Adu alone at a grand piano at the Bowl. And she's an astonishing musician. She puts down a few chords and she starts her own form of blues. Her roots are from Ghana and New Zealand. She grew up in New Zealand. She was a student at Princeton. She now lives in Brooklyn and she teaches music classes for prisoners in Sing Sing. And she pours out an amount of beauty in her life that you kind of can't believe. And composition after composition is ravishingly beautiful. You'll hear two of her string quartets, one played by, well, both played, in fact, by the Calder Quartet, a quartet with harp that she wrote for her mother, and another quartet that is just pure joy for arriving in America on her birthday and all the magic numbers lining up and just joy. Layla wrote devastating songs about Trayvon Martin, about a whole series of events right up to the present. And she's also written songs that come deeply from her Buddhist practice. And the big piece we're not playing yet, because I don't think it's completely finished, is she's written a giant orchestral piece for her own voice and orchestra around an amazingly radical Buddhist scripture. Anyway, she's a person and a composer and a performer with so many dimensions and so many cultures and voices and lifetimes moving through her. She's a rare and very beautiful being. So yes, I commend her to you, definitely.
And there's South India as well. We're kind of...
Well, you know. So, I mean, here is the neighborhood, right? The Oak Grove School's right there. And so, you know, and I really have such an image of Krishnamurti under the oak trees, 5 minutes from here, as one of the most powerful parts of Ojai history. And that idea of just people trying to speak wisdom under oak trees in a beautiful place, at a beautiful time, and find a center again. And so I wanted some beautiful, ravishing South Indian moment in the program. And Aruna Sairam is, yes, one of the great South Indian musicians, but she's also like a sage and a pioneer for women, a pioneer for Indian music, a pioneer across cultures, across generations. She's simply one of the great Indian figures. And when she comes to Ojai, it will be an incredible privilege to receive her. The idea of South Indian music, of course, is that it is one step from Simone Weil. It is philosophy in music. It is philosophy as music. It is, as you know, in India, they resist words because words are so imprecise. And so philosophically, they're not acceptable. Music is the only way of being exact. And so you go to the deepest point of philosophy by going directly through music. And the philosophy is, again, a philosophy of joy, of replenishment, of amazement. Indian music is about starting with next to nothing and arriving at this dazzling tapestry from a set of a handful of notes, which you lay out at the beginning, and then out of those notes, you proceed to construct the universe. And that idea that we have, even if it's not much, whatever you start with something modest, start with something small. But the gift of being human that becomes a vision. Aruna is one of the greatest masters of this South Indian Carnatic improvisation. And as she takes these phrases and the wind begins to fill the sails of her voice, it is just pure exhilaration. And of course, they go right into the heart of your metabolism. And so they know exactly what they're doing with your internal rhythmic system, and it changes your heartbeat. It is just one of the most exciting things in the world. So in terms of, I mean, and probably, I don't know how many people here are just absolutely mad for South Indian food, but I am devoted to South Indian food. It is just so life-giving. And the music is the same thing. It's just insanely life-giving. My problem with South Indian food is I eat it too quickly because I'm just too excited. But it is that kind of sheer pleasure in the music that, of course, is a spiritual high point in your life. And we'll follow that spiritual high point on Saturday night with an evening that I can't even begin to talk about because I'm so overwhelmed by it. We've spent yesterday rehearsing it. Josephine Baker evening. Now, just to tell you quickly how that happened. Fantastic Julia Bullock. When she graduated from Juilliard, you know, you have to give a coming out recital. And hers was sponsored by the Naumburg Foundation, so it was lovely and correct and nice people and etc. Julia announced for her recital some Spanish songs followed by a big Messiaen group, intermission. After intermission, Josephine Baker's set, and then the concert ended with Billy Strayhorn. And that was her New York recital. And you say, thank God times have changed. As you say, okay, that's what young people are doing in classical music. How perfectly thrilling. So we just said to Julia, would you like to take this Josephine Baker group more seriously and go somewhere with it? And she said yes. Claire Chase. So I said, well, the composer for that would be Taishan Sori. Now, those of you who are Taishan fans are 10 steps ahead of me. I did not know who Taishan was 3 months ago. Of course, now I have his CDs running permanently at home, morning, noon, and night. He resists the word jazz, but he comes from an African-American creative improvisatory tradition. And of course, he's been a sideman with many of the very great jazz players. And many of Vijay Iyer's albums feature Taishan, and you'll see a lot more of them both next summer at Ojai. But Taishan also has his own groups, and when he took over the Village Vanguard 2 months ago, people went crazy in New York, and it was one of the legendary jazz nights. Just to say, Taishan, what's marvelous is when you talk to him, he talks about Stockhausen and early John Cage and doesn't discuss Miles Davis. He's really intent on the avant-garde tradition. At the same time, of course, he grew up with all the roots. Josephine left the United States in 1925. You know, she was in the musical that's now back, Wildly, Shuffle Along. She was in the chorus line of Shuffle Along. And then she left for Paris. The irony is, because she left when she was in her early 20s and became a giant star on the French stage of the French Music Hall, she never in her life sang black music. She sang music written by white professional French songwriters for the Lido and, you know, all the big French dance halls. So what we've done is invited Josephine to sing black music again. Taishan has taken 7 of her numbers, again written by brilliant French tunesmiths of that commercial world. And he's taken a song like Si j'étais blanche, if I was white. Which, when it's done in a nightclub with attitude, lasts 2.5 painless minutes. And it's kind of a lark. And Taishan turns that into a 17-minute meditation of a black person saying, what if I was white? And Taishan opens everything unspoken, everything unacknowledged, all these layer after layer of emotion that is never referred to. And suddenly a song like Si j'étais blanche, and a line like, I admired all those dolls with their beautiful white skin and their blonde hair, and thought I was the only dark person in the world. These lines open up into a space of such depth of feeling, melancholy, hope, wishful thinking, daydreaming, self-hatred, and sense of, wait a minute, what is reality? And do I really wish for that? All of those layers suddenly pour out in this music that Taishan has written.
Should mention texts as well.
And people may have heard a lot this last year of a poet named Claudia Rankine. She wrote a book called Citizen, which has been such an important book across America. Claudia has just been appointed as the official poet at Yale University. And I asked Claudia if she would write about Josephine Baker. And Claudia said, I was never interested in Josephine Baker. Why would I write about her? And Claudia did the research and then became very, 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 very busy as her book Citizen really took off. And she's been doing readings all over America and all over Europe nonstop for the last 10 months. So finally, it was clear we were not going to get any texts from Claudia. So I just sent her a text message saying, Claudia, another time, it's fine. I know you're really busy. We'll do this another time. 3 weeks ago, the first text arrived. And she said, I did the research, I might as well write the poems. And the last poems came in 4 days ago. And so what you'll hear on Saturday night is not a kind of worked out show business evening. It will be just putting the music and the words together for the first time and really tasting what this new work is. But I do think it's one of the most important works of my lifetime, and it's going to be with the world for many, many, many decades. It's a very powerful, beautiful statement by a new generation of artists, and uses Josephine Baker in a way that would make her proud, ultimately. And if I could just mention quickly, a lot of Josephine Baker's biography is not known. We all know the fabulous Paris banana skirt and all that. But, of course, later, she served in the French Resistance, as did Simone Weil. And so I was interested in two women in Paris who challenged the world with their bodies and worked for the French Resistance. And then Josephine tried to create, because she couldn't have children, she adopted 12 kids from all over the world of every race and created her rainbow tribe. It was a bit of a disaster, but it was an attempt in the 50s to say something across racial lines. And then in the March on Washington, she was the only woman who Martin Luther King invited to speak. And when Dr. King was shot, Coretta Scott King called Josephine Baker to ask her to be the face of the civil rights movement. Josephine ultimately declined, but those are parts of her biography that are not really announced by the banana skirt. And so we wanted to give this woman a little more depth, a little more context, a little more range, a little more emotional life than she's usually allowed to show.
Well, I want to thank Peter. I was going to give you a chance to ask questions, but when Peter talks, we listen. And I just want to say, Peter, you're going to be available throughout this week.
Should we have just one or two? I know this will be the only time in the Ojai Festival we're running a little behind.
All right. I'm all for it. Here's one right now.
Yes. Block party. I will tell you about the block party. I have to say, I'm so thrilled that we're going to end the festival in Sao Paulo. Sunday is a very special day. And it really came from conversations with David Harrington and Kronos a couple years ago. David said, we are starting to play more of our concerts for kids and with music written by kids, because music education has been removed from the schools. Musical instruments are removed from the schools. We have to put music back in kids' lives. And that's where this came from, and we said, okay, the last day of the Ojai Festival will belong to kids. And so the Yola Orchestra will be here, and we will premiere, I think, 8 pieces written by high school students, which is just a joy. And something written by Tanya Leon, who knows what she's doing in her way, definitely. Then we will have Copernicus, an opera by Claude Vivier that you tried to suggest I should talk about. I will talk about it, I promise, eventually, because there's a lot, something needs to be said. That, I just would invite you all to that as a rare and beautiful moment. The Copernicus is just, we've come from rehearsals an hour ago, and it is transcendent. Then we're going to go to Santa Paula. The first band you're going to hear at Santa Paula is called Los Jornaleros. And they are a group of migrant workers from Los Angeles who, in the middle of an immigration raid, decided they had to let people know what was actually going on and not report it in the newspaper. So they chose as their name the journalists, Los Jornaleros, and they made music their journalism. And they made their first songs about their friends that were taken away. And this is music at the highest level of immediacy and presence and urgency. It picks up where Simone Weil leaves off. It carries on from Dina. It carries on this great tradition of music as something we need to actually just be informed and let us be citizens and let us be human. So the first band up is Los Jornaleros, and they are just beyond belief. Then we're going to have wild combinations of everybody you've heard all week improvising in strange results, but for fun. And then the final band, Cesar Castro is one of the great Veracruz masters. And you're going to hear jarocho music like you've never heard it, at a level of such perfection. And of course, it is the music that belongs in this particular geography from all the towns around here. And you will hear the greatest of the jarocho bands. And that will close the Ojai Festival, and it will be exhilarating. Brace yourself. It's just one of the all-time great, great events.
Thank you. That is a finale. That is terrific. Thank you, Peter, so much for joining us and for creating this magical weekend we're about to experience. And we are looking forward to every single concert and all of its diversity.
See you everywhere, and let's just come up and talk and just say hello, and let's enjoy, 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 enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you so much.